out of... Oh, I'm hearing you in the wrong spot. Just a second. I always forget that I gotta put my headphones in the actual computer for the Skype interviews and not the soundboard. Alright, I think I should... Fudge. Alright, I think I should be able to hear you now.
Okay, how's that sound?
I got it. Sweet.
Is it loud enough?
Go ahead and give me a test.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I think you're good. Let me turn my mic down just a little. So we're not imbalanced. There we go. All right, so there are big things going on in Chicago, man.
Indeed. I think it's been a long time coming, man. You know, it gets to the point where, you know, enough's enough with not just the results and the way that the organization is being run, but just the apathy, you know. I mean, at some point, you know, fans have to take a stand, and I hope that's what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this sort of subject because, you know, supportership always has this kind of lofty idealism to it, right? And as far as I've been a supporter, or at least been around it, for us it hasn't been tested that much. You know, we've only been in the league. Go ahead. We've only been in the league for 5 years, and had our ups and downs. But you know, it seems like a lot would have to go wrong for us to get in a spot where we would be apathetic or feel like our backs were against the wall.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, take all of the, you know, lofty goals of, you know, what being a supporter means, and, you know, just take that and set that aside for a minute. I know me personally, you know, as I kind of alluded to in the piece I wrote, I'm not really one of those guys. You know, all I'm asking for, and I imagine the majority of the folks who actually pay attention to the team and who are soccer fans in Chicago, all we want is a competitive team.
Yeah.
You know, and it hurts even more because, you know, the team's been around since '98, and granted, it started off, you know, probably the best it possibly could have back in '98, you know, but it did continue to win for the next, you know, 11, 12 seasons. You know, and it's clear now, enough time has passed, there's enough evidence, there's enough knowledge among the supporters and among the fans and among, you know, all the players and staff that have, you know, revolved out of that organization since Andrew Hauptman has taken control, that the problem is poor leadership, you know. And Frank Yallop came in 2 years ago, and it's only gotten worse. And it's not just him. I mean, there was a Q&A on Sunday before the game with the chief operating officer and de facto president, Atul Khosla, and he revealed throughout that dialogue that he's now, you know, involved in the soccer side of things. And lo and behold, they haven't improved. So what you have is you have an absentee owner. You have a billionaire who runs, you know, an investment firm that holds billions in assets, who, you know, lives in Beverly Hills, and he, you know, his excuse is he's a private person, and so he stays hands off and he leaves it to these people who are incompetent, and then every once in a while he shows up, you know, and pretends like he cares, and then he goes away. And so, you know, that, I think, is probably unacceptable for most supporters and fans, but it hurts even more in Chicago. Like, we have this thing, Chicago sports fans have this sort of strange pride, you know. It's kind of illogical, you know. Like, aside from the Bulls and the Blackhawks, you know, of the recent, you know, let's say past, you know, 15, 20 years, you know, the baseball teams and the Bears, their titles are few and far between, and frankly, so are the Flyers. The Sting was a winning team back in the old NASL days, but you know, all we want is accountability and effort and toughness,
Right.
and competitiveness, and we have none of that. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen a Fire game. Maybe you watched the one where they played Portland.
Yeah.
I mean, they're terrible, and they're not even our number one DP in terms of money, Sean Maloney. That game he played in Philadelphia, it was so poor that even at halftime, Frank Yallop made a comment about how he needs to try harder, or he alluded to that.
Yeah.
Something's wrong. It's a mentality, and look, that starts at the top.
Yeah. Well, let's set the stage a little bit. So right now I have on the other line Scott Fenwick, the founder of the Chicago Fire blog OFT Soccer. Is that correct?
OTF.
OTF. And so what's going on now is on Saturday. It's a Saturday game, right?
Yep, Saturday, 7:30 Central. Colorado's in town.
There are two different protests being planned. One is the 90-minute tailgate, which is designed so that people can come to the game but not enter the stadium and spend 90 minutes in solidarity with other fans to show their support of how disappointed they are in the Fire's management. And then there is the blackout, which, as I have read, the design is for some of those people and people who are season ticket holders who have already bought their ticket to wear black and to bring in black streamers for an end of the game sort of tifo to express how disappointed they are with the Fire. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And this whole thing was very organic, and it all was spawned after the Fire lost that Open Cup semifinal last Wednesday in Philadelphia. They had the opportunity, if they would have won, to host a Cup final at home, and given the importance of the U.S. Open Cup to the Chicago Fire, it could have redeemed almost everything. And so discontent was sowed because of that poor showing. And this idea, for a 90-minute tailgate, was kind of kicked around, and then I wrote something, sort of a half, confessional, half, hey, we should do this, and then Marty Tomzak came up with the blackout, and so what we've done is we've dovetailed it. So it's pretty simple. We're asking everybody, no matter if they plan to protest or not, to wear black in solidarity as fans, and we're saying, hey, game time is scheduled to start at 7:30. So if you want to do the 90-minute tailgate, do the 90-minute tailgate till 9. And if you're holding a ticket and you want to participate in the blackout, enter the stadium at 9 and go sit in the Harlem End where Section 8 is and participate in that blackout action, which will basically consist of supporters being silent, and then in the 85th minute, Black Tifo will be unleashed, and then when the whistle blows, so will the streamers. So it's sort of like, there's something there for everybody, and it's a simple plan. And hey, if you don't want to do, if you show up, without a ticket, well, then you just stay out in the lot with other people, and hang out. So there's options, and they all sort of blend well together, and it should work. We're seeing a groundswell of support here. Lots of people are behind this, and again, it gives people options to express themselves.
I thought the piece that I will link on our website did a good job of explaining that you might be angry, or you might just be sad, or you might just be frustrated. Different levels of passion and being upset are represented through the blackout. So it's not just the people who are leading the charge that are very upset. It can just be like, hey, I don't want to sit through another losing season. This is what this represents.
I
It,
think that's the sort of elegant, simple genius of Marty's idea is that you might not even want Andrew Houtman out. You might not even have a problem with the front office, but you're probably sad and upset that your team's only won like 11 or 12 games the last 2 years.
yeah.
So perhaps wearing black and or sitting with the rest of the fans in the Harlem End doing the blackout tifo will express your sadness at that. So it's a really nice, again, elegant, simple way to sort of catch all those emotions. And then again, there's going to be folks who just don't want to go in and who are going to show up, who renounced their season tickets years ago. They're going to show up just to tailgate and show solidarity with fans and have a good time. And there's going to be a concert before. It's called Rock Against Racism. This is the fourth year that Section 8's put this on. So there's going to be live bands in the lot, probably from like 5 to 7. And who knows, maybe they'll play longer because of 90-minute tailgate. But, there's plenty to do. And, again, plenty of options for people to express themselves.
Just as a side note, it's crazy how little influence the U.S. Open Cup seems to, or the amount of attention it seems to get from the league. We have to watch it on streams that seemingly are videoed by interns who, I don't know, they're filming some sort of avant-garde like film project when they're shooting these games, and yet you said that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. For the Portland, like one of our darkest times was losing to Cal FC in the U.S. Open Cup. I think we had like 47 shots on goal and didn't score at all, and that it ended up actually costing John Spencer his job. And if you look at Seattle's tailspin this season, it stems from their loss to us in the Open Cup. And I just find that to be really hilarious. Switching gears a little bit. So how we came to talk to each other is you penned a piece about the relationship between bloggers and the front offices of these MLS teams. And I just wanted to set the stage of like who you are, what your relationship is to the team, how it all started, and basically how your blog was built and where it went.
Well, as I wrote, I was a season ticket holder and I had consumed all of the media that I could find about the team, and I was just sort of left wanting. I was bored.
Yeah.
I became a soccer fan when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Romania. I was a casual fan before that. I would go to fire games every now and then, but having lived in Europe, I really felt it, and I learned the game in a deep way, and it was part of the way that I learned a new language and assimilated to a culture and that type of thing. So again, I thought to myself, hey, why not start writing and do something different, do something irreverent, do something informed as well, just sort of write with a voice that's different than what's already out there. And it sort of took off, and we built it up, and at one time we had like 20 contributors, and at one time we were leading the way in terms of the metrics for all of the independent blogs and that type of thing, and we had a podcast. But when the editorial, well, let me backtrack. In the piece, I detail my relationship and how it came to be with the Firefront. And if folks want to check that out, just read the piece. But it soured, and you'll read why in the piece. And shortly thereafter, that infamous editorial came out, and I mean, it was just a body blow, and they didn't apologize. It took them a year and a half to apologize in sort of a forced manner.
So, like, set the stage for us with this editorial. Like, I've read it. I'm not sure everyone that is going to be listening has. Basically, this was a PR post from the fire on the fire's website, sort of, and just take us through like what it was and why it was offensive.
Well, what happened? First of all, it was covered by national media. I remember Alexi Lalas was talking about it. Jason Davis was talking about it. Everybody was talking about it. I mean, even Deadspin, the Tribune, everybody. It was a public relations gaffe of massive proportions. And the context is, if you recall, in 2013, DC United was very bad. I mean, record-wise, it was one of the worst league records ever, I think, by any team in the history of MLS. Chicago Fire hosted that team in a U.S. Open Cup semifinal at home. And, the club really spent a lot of time and money, more than they usually had done, promoting the game. And a really good crowd showed up. It was a record crowd for a U.S. Open Cup game for the Fire. And they lost 2-0. and after all of the information came out and all of the evidence, it was clear that what happened was somebody who was sitting in the premium seats yelled up to what is known as the Second Star Club, which is a fancy club that Houtman built that has sort of like skybox type seats that are very close to the premium seats that are like right on the field behind the benches. So, for example, if you walked to the top of the concourse, you could pretty much like talk to somebody in the Second Star seats, albeit you'd be looking up at them. But apparently, the story goes is somebody yelled up toward him like, "Hey, spend some money and get some players." And then apparently, someone inside the Second Star Club started shouting profanity at that person. And so an argument ensued. So they used that as an excuse to browbeat the fan base in a general way, basically shaming the fan base for something that wasn't even all that serious, and just went to demonstrate how thin-skinned the owner is, and called the fans out. The most audacious statement from that editorial for many of us was that they made the claim that club culture starts from the top down.
Yeah.
Totally antithetical to what any football supporter would believe, and especially, a team, Fire, who has, in MLS terms, a pretty deep history. And there was a time where Section 8 was really strong. So you had that, and, they circled the wagons, they wouldn't apologize, they hemmed and they hawed, and after, conflict that had already existed for years between supporters and the owner, this was just sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And, it's evident that it was a big mistake, because it wasn't just Chicago Fire fans and supporters saying this is disgusting and this is wrong. I mean, this was like national media, and everybody was incredulous. Like, anyone who covered MLS, like, how could you do this?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Basically, like, just giving like further context for somebody who wasn't there and reading the article. Like, it was basically like we're good people. There are not good people out there. So all the good people support us, and that makes you a true fan.
I mean, that's a good way of sort of encapsulating it. And also add to that, there were veiled sort of accusations or implications that fans were potentially violent.
Yeah.
And that really hit a lot of folks in Section 8, because for years they had worked very hard with the security firm that works at Toyota Park to make sure that there were no incidents of violence, and that there was peace in the section and so forth. And they achieved that. And so for the owner, for that implication to be part of that editorial, that just sort of added to the hurt and the anger.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your piece that so like at the height of your blog, you were recruited to potentially join the fire and become either a bridge from the front office to the supporters or the fans. Uh, where was that in this timeline?
That was about May, April, May 2013. What happened was there's this guy Brendan Hannon who does the Galaxy PR now. When it was known that Brendan was leaving the fire for the Galaxy, the former communications director Dan Lobring, the unfortunate soul who they made, ghostwrite that editorial.
And his experience was in video games.
He
Yeah.
worked for like a sports marketing
Okay.
company. He didn't really have any soccer background at all. Like he helped promote a FIFA game or something, but it wasn't much. But at any rate, he said to me, "Hey, like there might be a place for you in the organization." And so this whole dance went on for months, where I would have these multiple meetings and phone calls with him, Kosla. I sat down with Houtman for 90 minutes one day. Javier Leon, the former GM. And this sort of got dragged out for months. And then, finally, I was kind of like, hey, like, what's the deal? Like, I'm done with graduate school. Is there a job here or not? And that's when Kosla proposed that he pay me to write club sort of not generated, but he offered to pay me to write editorial copy that sort of he would commission. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I and also my other guys that wrote with me, we prided ourselves on being independent. And I do allude in my piece that we're talking about here that I sort of fell from that a little bit, and I was sort of playing the game, and it showed. It wasn't anything too drastic, but it wasn't the same as it was before.
They were basically they were trying to contract you to write friendly, positive pieces, but on your website.
Right, and so my response was, well, why don't you have me write on Chicago-Fire.com?
Right.
And he's like, well, we can't do that. I'm like, well, why not? He's like, well, he said, because of your reputation. I said, what's my reputation? Well, you kind of take a hard line, and some people think you're a prick. I'm like, well, okay. And he's like, plus you said that the coach should be fired. So here I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, that happens all the time in sports writing.
Yeah.
And you're sort of insulting me here. So, I had a sort of a moral issue with the proposition, and also I was a little bit insulted by it. So I said, no, let's try this. And the idea was, and it's still out there, to try to have some sort of a club sort of facilitated or sponsored organization. These types of things existed elsewhere in the world, where you have a forum of different types of fans and supporters that come from different types of backgrounds and places, and the idea is to be able to bridge the gap between the front office and supporters, which is something that they really need, because they needed and they still need, because even back then, before that editorial came out, there was a trust problem between the fans and the front office. Now it's completely a shambles. I mean, it's gotten to the point where, people are just like they're just tuning out. It makes them so sad. They don't even want to deal, So, soon after I said, no, I'm not going to work for you, that editorial came out, and then an editorial before that came out, which basically made excuses and said that signing DPs was hard. And that I'm not kidding. And it was called 2DP or to DP. And that idea was floated to me by Kosla. Like one time when I was meeting with him, he's like, "What would you think about a piece, that talked about this topic?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't see the utility in that. So you're gonna write on your website, make excuses of why you can't sign to DP." And he went ahead and did it anyway, which is another piece of evidence showing that he's incompetent. But so yeah, I dodged a bullet, as I say in the piece. And that was sort of the beginning of the end for me. Like um, I sort of stopped writing as much. I went into more editing and producing the podcast. We became very aggressive in our stance towards the front office. And then, around, let's say, a year and a half ago, I pretty much just stopped doing stuff. And then just recently, things got so bad that, I had wanted to tell my story for a while, and it just felt like this was the right time. And so I took the opportunity and I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the reason why I find this to be a fascinating subject. With newspapers kind of dying and becoming more desperate, they're becoming just like everyone else, especially I think with MLS clubs, where they're dying for content too. They want access, and they're not necessarily getting it because I think MLS clubs don't have a whole lot to gain. Maybe the Fire have more to gain, but like for example, here in Portland, like the team doesn't have that much to gain by a blogger or by coverage. They pretty much maxed out their market.
Right.
What they're afraid of is any type of negative press. So they're incredibly risk adverse. So that makes so you can eliminate like maybe the newspapers, right? And then all of a sudden you have blogs, and then you have the national media. Well, the national media doesn't know jack shit about the local team, right? They see them once, and they're not following the whole narrative that is built up to that game. So then you have bloggers, but then how much time does one person have to write? Which writing takes a ton of your time, right? If you have a job, you can't do it. So there's a balance between the last bastion of any type of real journalism, even though bloggers aren't even trained in journalism. But they're sort of thrust into this position of being the only independent voice that isn't dictated by some other factor. Yet they're not journalists, and ultimately, if they could get paid doing it, why wouldn't they? Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you bring up the issue of risk averse. To me, that's only a problem because, one of the things that Atua Kosla told me, and this is one of his catch lines, and if I recall correctly, I sort of heard it, before he started using it publicly, is that he wants to own the soccer conversation. That, to me, is the most ridiculous, superfluous thing that a club like that should even aspire to do. They've got 100 more things that they need to work on to get better before they should even dream of owning the soccer conversation. If you're Bayern Munich or Manchester United, maybe you could own the soccer conversation. Maybe, and I say maybe because you can't stop people from communicating. You can't stop people from producing content. I mean, it's absurd, that disposition. And this man also said to me, he was saying, oh well, if there's going to be independent, and he's talking to me, a guy who had a press pass. It's like, well, if independent media is going to be critical of us, it's like, I'll go Mark Cuban on their ass and take away their press passes. And I thought, oh, so you're Mark Cuban now? Like, you don't own this team. Who do you think you are? You're the chief operating officer. Your job should be like budgeting.
Yeah.
So this was 2 years ago. It's even worse now. I mean, what we've come to find out now about this guy, and excuse me if I'm repeating myself, is he's actually meddling in the soccer side now. And lo and behold, it's gotten worse.
Yeah, if anybody wants to listen to the Q&A that he had with supporters, it's on the hashtag blackout CF, what is it, blackout CF97?
Correct.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting look. It's a little bit of difficult audio, but there's some definite anger in there. But here comes the part of the podcast that's deeply, deeply important to me, Scott. Who is Don Walsh?
Oh, that should be like the name of a documentary film. Don Walsh.
And wait. And why are you an enemy of the fire?
Right. So Don Walsh is a fan of the Fire, a super fan, one might say. Others call him a meta troll, which I love that term. Some people think that he's like, having a laugh.
Yeah.
With his antics on social media, Reddit, Twitter. But if you listen to that Q&A, and I did, and this is why I've decided to just not engage this guy. I mean, I think he's literally crazy. Like that, it's not politically correct thing to say, but I think he is not mentally stable.
So, just to set the stage for our listeners, this Q&A is probably an hour and 30 minutes long. Yeah. And most of it is the communications director sort of backpedaling and trying his best to answer impossible questions. And then,
that's the COO. It's the COO.
Okay. It's slow. Yeah. And then supporters being very angry. And then one guy comes in and he wants to get rid of the capos. He wants to get rid of general admission seating. He basically wants to get rid of supportership altogether. Because he...
This is a guy who ran for Section 8 president, or chairman, excuse me, and on a platform where one of his slogans was, I wish he would have used Enemies of the Fire then. This is like his new thing, Enemies of the Fire. But this guy literally said that the Chicago Fire fan base, and he used this word, needed to be cleansed.
Oof.
Cleansed. Oof. And so people started calling him Don Hitler.
So moving back...
at this point.
Yeah. Moving back to the protests on Saturday. I had a couple questions about it. One is, what do you say to the charge that, which I think is a legitimate charge from some of the people who are responding to this, that you should always support the players, and having an in-stadium protest is kind of the antithetical to the supportership understanding.
Well, players are big boys. They get it. They know, for all the things that we think we know, they know more. They know what the problems are. But they're professionals, and so they have to do their job. I would go so far as to say that some of those players would probably be glad, or are going to be glad. The ones that care about the badge are going to be glad to see that protest, that blackout.
We had
that's my opinion.
Yeah, so early in the season, somebody unfurled a banner at the home game that said "Same as it ever was," and it had us below the red line, and it was really early in the season, so it was kind of weird timing. But actually, our captain Will Johnson, his quote was, "I would be worried if it wasn't there."
There you go.
Yeah. I do wonder, though, because I feel like implicit in sports fandom is heartbreak and struggle and losing. If you think about it, any given league, there's only one winner every year. So when you sign up for fandom. You're signing up for losing more than you are winning, and the catharsis of finally winning includes all of the losing, right? So like, how do you factor that into? Okay, what you guys haven't made the playoffs since 2008, right?
Well, 2009 was the last real playoff game. They lost the play-in game in 2012 to Houston at home. I don't count that as a playoff game, but whatever. Some do.
Yeah. So 5 years of ineptitude. I love sports. I have plenty of teams that I mean, I like confession. I like the Raiders in football, and they haven't won in 20 years, right? And honestly, maybe you're right in the sense of apathy. It comes every year where I'm like, well, the Raiders are going to lose. If they win 8 games, which is the amount that they will lose, I would be really happy if they won as many as they lost, right?
Sure.
But is that not implicit in sports fandom that part of the catharsis of them winning is that time that you spent with them when they were losing?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. I think, though, in this particular situation, the anger and frustration is just as much rooted in the relationship between the front office and the fans. Because there have been promises made and not delivered on. There have been, people who didn't follow through. There's been a revolving door of management. Management's been understaffed, and when it is staffed, often it's staffed with people who aren't qualified for the job. And with respect to the actual results themselves, again, I think that if folks were convinced that, in this so-called league of parity, that we had a chance, and that the effort was there and it was consistent effort, people might, be a bit less upset. But it's been so inconsistent. And, there's been so many opportunities, as MLS and U.S. Open Cup does, present throughout a season. So many opportunities to turn the corner. And, they just don't get it done. And I think that enough people understand that that's symptomatic of a cultural problem within the organization. And so I think that when you get to that point, a lot of people either put their foot down or just walk away.
Do you have the support of the supporter group?
I've been personally contacting some of the leadership, some of the former leadership. I would say for the most part, they're being supportive. I think that once they see that the people out there understand that the plan for Saturday is a pretty straightforward and simple one, and they're able to feel confident that all of the logistical issues are worked out, they'll probably feel more enthusiastic about it. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes here. This all just sort of happened. And I wrote what I wrote. I saw an opportunity, and things sort of took off from there. The supporter group is sort of an interesting case because you have this ISA, this Independent Support Association, and then you have Section 8, and then you have these other groups, and for me, at times it seems kind of convoluted. And so when you have that, perhaps sometimes, there are inefficiencies. And I think that, with the way that this happened and the way that, the handful of us who've been organizing this, online have been able to act fast and build support fast, we've been able to do it efficiently and effectively because we're not like burdened by, you know, a charter or bylaws or a committee or all different types of mechanisms that are in place to like check power.
Mhm.
Um, I've multiple people have either come out and said to me or alluded to the fact that they're like afraid, they either don't want to lead or they're afraid to lead, and they don't want to step on anybody's toes, and they don't want to be a dictator and this type of thing. And you know what? I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. There's a certain point where, you know, if you want to get something done, someone's got to step up. You know,
Right.
right. And I'm not saying I'm that guy. I think it's a bunch of different people. And I think that once we get to Saturday, I think it's going to be even more people. Because I have faith that with this simple plan, that the people who show up are going to be cool with it. And you know what? They're going to choose to do what they want to do. And that's that, you know? And as long as everybody behaves and doesn't drink too much and doesn't, you know, hurt themselves or anybody else, it should be okay.
Yeah, so that brings me to another reason why I kind of find this issue to be fascinating. Is that both the clubs, the supporter group, and even you and I, like basically anybody on social media, seems to have this problem of being afraid of the false boogeyman, right? Because when you have so many interactions, when you have every word that you could possibly say being judged at any given moment, you become like this idea that like you need to remain isolated or you need to remain controlled. And discourse is not perfect. You know, discourse is supposed to be. There should be a Don Welsh. There should be a Scott Fenwick. There should be Hauptman, and they should all be talking inefficiently and as human beings, right? Instead of like trying to control something that they haven't said anyways, right? And so like this idea, like what I said earlier, that the clubs are risk adverse. For what? What would somebody say that would hurt you so bad? Uh,
Well, I agree with that, and I think it's a corporatization of communication. You know, it's PR control, it's message control. I mean, people are trained to control information, control the message. I just think that, and it seems that you're in agreement with me that, you know, to me, in a lot of ways, that's futile. You know, I know, and I got a lot of respect for Brendan Hannon, and he's kicking ass over at the Galaxy because he's a talented, smart guy. You know, but he sort of brought me into the fold because his philosophy was, hey, big tent. You know, like we're not, you know, Manchester United. You know, we need people producing content. We need, you know, the exposure, that type of thing. You know, and you know, it's not a surprise that that guy, you know, had conflict with, you know, Houtman and Koslow. You know, it's not a surprise that, you know, a talented guy took his services and his labor and his talent elsewhere, and that has happened again and again with this organization, and not just from front office, but also from the soccer side.
Yeah, I remain very concerned that you know in this new world that we live in, like what great artists are we silencing with the fear of retribution for something that they haven't even really said yet. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you seem like an independent person with your own unique voice, and you built that voice. What's wrong with that?
yeah. You know what? I I'm not gonna go so far as to say that they, if we're gonna have like a binary here where
Yeah.
there's a position, I guess that makes sense. I'm not gonna go so far to say that they think that there's something wrong with that. But what I've learned is this, is that you know what, if you really want to be independent, you gotta be truly independent insofar as you can't ask or expect anything from them,
Yeah.
right? And I my whole deal was like I was the man in the stands, right? So when I did my match reports, it would be like, you know, dispatch from the man in the stands or whatever. And frankly, I enjoyed it more in the stands. I thought the press box sucked. And I had my credential that 2013 season, and I didn't use it that often, you know, because no one was paying me. I was doing this for my own, gratification for fun. Um, but it was one of those things where somebody offers you a press pass, and I was like, well, hell, why not?
Yeah.
And then the shame of it was is that in that world, no one, and this is in all sports. I have a buddy who covers NFL for a major network affiliate here in Chicago, and even he told me, he's like, you know what? He's like, none of these communications and PR personnel will ever be. I shouldn't say none, but most won't be directed to you. That's not how they're. That's not the type of people that they are. That's not what they're really trained to do. So no one really said to me, "Hey, you can't do this and you can't do that." Um, Now, I'm ultimately responsible for figuring that out myself. But it's kind of a precarious situation because it's like okay, are there rules or are there not rules?
Right.
If there are, what are they? So one day, don't lead me to believe that there aren't any, and then the other day, lead me to believe that they are. And on both those days, you never really gave help with figuring it out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But again, I'm not a professional, and so professional journalists, are trained to navigate these waters. So I guess long story short is bloggers, podcasters. You know what? If you don't want to be censored or you don't want to feel like you have to hold back with anything, then don't ask anything from them. And if you're a season ticket holder, you're especially empowered because you're their customer.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. To transition, what is the best possible outcome that you can think of from Saturday? Not just the day, but how it reverberates throughout the rest of the season.
Well, I mean, look, this season is pretty much done. I mean, they're not mathematically eliminated from playoffs, but it's highly unlikely. But the greater issue here underlying all this is the ownership. Um, if the owner is going to continue to behave like he has past, 8 or so years that he's owned the team, then, you know, as I wrote, I don't see any other solution than to turn Toyota Park into, as I call it, Chivas East, right?
Yeah.
And so he either sells it or he doesn't. Now, maybe, excuse me, if this action, pops off like it should, and maybe there's enough consistent, maybe he'll have a change of heart. Maybe he'll figure out a way how to hire the right people. Because, look, if he hires the right people, like for example, when Peter Wilt was the president of Chicago Fire, Phil Anschutz, the owner of AEG, he never had to speak to the fans. He never had to say anything. Why? Because he had a strong soccer professional as the leader of his team in the office, on the ground, 24/7, doing that job. If Andrew Howman can find that guy, if Andrew Howman could, let's say, find Peter Wilt Part 2, Andrew Howman can live his life in peace in Beverly Hills. Frankly, I don't think anyone would care. But until something changes that comes from the top in terms of making better decisions and putting people in the places where decisions have to be made that are more qualified and more competent, you know, it's not going to get any better. If he's banking on the fact that every other team is going to sign, a superstar or an aging superstar, and that means that, all of his home games will have decent attendance because everybody's coming out to see the other team's star. Well, who knows? Maybe he's got some data that I don't have, but that's pretty precarious. But at the same time, the frustrating thing from a financial perspective is that if you understand how MLS works, And if you understand the relationship between the operating LLC and the owner himself as the owner operator, as the member of the league LLC, you understand that this is a man who bought a franchise or the right to operate and own a franchise and bought in as a share of an owner of MLS itself for $30 million, meaning that because of the growth of this professional sport in this country and the growth of MLS, he can just sit there and potentially take operating losses on his operating LLC, have tax write-offs, continue to watch his asset appreciate. So he could sit here and do what he's been doing for the next 5 to 10 years, then sell and still make a fortune. The last time the club was valuated in 2012 from that Forbes article, they said 102 million. That's a $72 million profit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that question as well. It's like, how much is this stemming from the structure of the league itself? Because most of the other clubs, they have a huge financially viable backer who's basically investing in the team, which is basically investing in soccer becoming a big sport, and generally are hands off too, right? We don't have that here. Fortunately, we have an owner that is obsessed with the team and winning. But other clubs, they definitely have that as well. My question to you is, say that does happen. Say that everybody, as far as who's running the team, when it comes to the soccer side of things, and then the communications department is improved, yet it's still soccer. It's still 11-man game. The ball is still round, and success doesn't find it. Would you and the other supporters, and by supporters I just mean fans, be satisfied with that?
I mean, probably not totally satisfied, but I think that if the fans and the supporters believed that the folks in charge were competent and that the ownership cared enough to either be there or not be there, and if they're not there, they cared enough and they were smart enough to put in people who were competent, and it just happened to be a run of, perhaps poor luck on the field, I don't think that you would have, a situation like you have now, because what you have now has been building and building and building for a number of years. Look at the Crew. Frankly, I'm very impressed with that. This guy Anthony Precourt. He came in, and I think he's done a really good job. Especially given that it's Columbus. They're competitive. They got a smart young coach. They do a lot with their resources. And everything's just sort of looking good there. And Precourt, he's not like Merritt, but he's out there. You see him every now and then. He'll hop on Twitter a little bit. When they came and played in Chicago recently, he was on Twitter. He was like, "Hey, I'm going out and I'm having a drink in downtown," and so on and so forth. That you get a lot of currency out of just little things like that. And Andrew Hauptman has not been willing to do that. And as I've been told by some pretty well-known people in the North American soccer media, well, he's not that type of guy. Well, okay, but hire the right people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm going to throw you one last curveball, though. Tell me why you love the Chicago Fire.
I don't love the Chicago Fire.
You don't?
I love soccer.
Yeah.
And I'm a Chicago guy, and so I root for my hometown team. When I was a little boy, it was the Sting. And you know what? I always want the Fire to win. But I consider myself a soccer fan first. I'm a Chicago fan. You know, I think there are a lot of people like me. I'm not a supporter in the traditional sense of the word. You know, like I don't. I'm not the guy, you know, going in and jumping around and singing and all that stuff. Like when I go to the game, and I don't anymore, but you know, when I do, I watch the game. And you know what? Everybody's got their own thing. Like the supporters are very important. They're extremely important. Like without them, the atmosphere wouldn't be, you know, tolerable. You know, they're an extremely important part. That's just not me. I'm not that guy. Um, I just want to see, you know, we're a Chicago area, you know, the city and the Chicagoland area. There's 9.5 million people, and this is one of the most diverse populations in the country and probably the world. There's so many soccer fans here. There's so many people that want to see a winning competitive soccer team that we can be proud of, you know, and we used to have it, and that's why it's there.
Well, Scott, I was it's a pleasure talking to you, and we will definitely be watching on Saturday to see how this goes. Um, you know, you never know where you're going to be uh, next year, 10 years down the road, the decisions that you're going to have to make. And I hope this goes off well and becomes a success story for the Fire and their fans. And thank you for sitting in with us.
Hey, well, I really appreciate you guys' interest. You know I can speak for many Chicago fans. We got a lot of respect for the Portland fans. And, you know, I think a lot of us, if we're being honest, wish that we could get our stuff together like you guys from top to bottom. So, you know, I wish you guys personally all the success in the world. I always root for Portland, and I hope I can come out there and visit one day and go to a match.
Yeah, MLS Cup.
That would be something.
All right, thanks, Scott.
Take care, man.
Yeah, have a good one.
Bye.